The unseen anniversary. The sun hung high in the cloudless sky, casting an oppressive heat over the city. Serena Thompson gazed out the window of the luxury sedan that her husband, Marcus, had arranged to transport her to the restaurant he had been raving about for weeks. 8 months pregnant and weary from a high-risk pregnancy that kept her mostly homebound, Serena had been hesitant to leave the comfort of their home. But today was special, her 5th wedding anniversary, and Marcus had insisted that they celebrate, promising her an unforgettable experience. "Almost there, Mom," the driver said, his eyes meeting hers briefly through the rearview mirror, just around the corner. Serena's hand rested protectively on her swollen belly as she shifted slightly in her seat. Every movement seemed like a calculated effort, but excitement flickered in her chest. It had been weeks since she had ventured beyond her home's confines, and today felt like a break from the routine of medical appointments and cautious resting. Her mind buzzed with anticipation of a beautiful lunch at an exclusive restaurant she had only seen in glossy magazine features. As the car rounded the final curve, the grand sight of Silver Crest came into view. The restaurant, perched elegantly on a small hill, radiated sophistication. Its glass facade reflected the picturesque surrounding landscape of verdant gardens and distant hills. Serena marveled at its beauty and felt a pang of gratitude for Marcus. He always knew how to create special moments, and this anniversary lunch was his way of reminding her that even in the midst of challenges, they were still a team, still partners in life's journey. The car pulled up to the entrance, where a valet rushed forward to open Serena's door. She paused for a moment, steadying herself for the short walk to the entrance, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The valet offered his hand, and she accepted, stepping out into the warm breeze. "Welcome to Silver Crest, Mom," the valet said with a smile. "Your husband mentioned he'd be running a few minutes late, but asked that you go inside and make yourself comfortable." Serena smiled back, grateful for the information. Marcus always had a way of making her feel cherished, even in his absence. Clutching the small gift box the driver had handed her, a surprise from Marcus, no doubt, she turned to face the grand entrance of the restaurant. A wave of self-consciousness washed over her as she noticed the other guests arriving in sleek suits and cocktail dresses. Her simple yet elegant maternity dress, chosen carefully for comfort, suddenly felt out of place among the high-end clientele, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. This was her anniversary, and she had every right to be here. Serena stepped forward and entered the cool, air-conditioned foyer of Silver Crest. Immediately, she was greeted by a young woman behind the hostess stand, her platinum blonde hair slicked back into a severe bun. The woman's blue eyes scanned Serena from head to toe, lingering for just a moment on her belly. There was a flash of something, judgment, perhaps, before her face settled into a neutral expression. "Good afternoon," the hostess said crisply. "How may I assist you?" "Hello," Serena began, her voice warm despite her nervousness. "I'm Serena Thompson. My husband, Marcus, made a reservation for us today. It's our anniversary." The hostess tapped swiftly on her sleek tablet, her manicured fingers moving in practiced precision. Her gaze shifted to Serena's face, then flickered back to the tablet. "Thompson, you said?" "Yes, Marcus Thompson. He should be here shortly." A pause. "I'm afraid I don't see a reservation under that name," the hostess replied, her tone shifting from neutral to icy. "Are you sure it was for today?" Serena's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, absolutely. He's been planning this for weeks." The hostess's fingers moved across the screen once more before she looked up with the same cold expression. "I'm sorry, but we are fully booked for today. Without a confirmed reservation, I'm afraid we cannot seat you." The weight of the hostess's words hit Serena like a physical blow. Her chest tightened, and a flush of embarrassment crept up her neck. She instinctively glanced around, noticing a few nearby patrons watching her, their curiosity thinly veiled by polite indifference. "Please," Serena began, her voice faltering. "It's extremely warm outside, and I'm 8 months pregnant. Could I at least wait inside until my husband arrives? He'll be here any minute. The hostess's gaze briefly flicked to Serena's swollen belly, then back to her face. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I understand your situation, Mom, but our policy is clear. Without a confirmed reservation, I'm afraid we cannot allow guests to wait inside. Serena blinked in disbelief. I don't mind waiting in the lobby. She tried again, feeling the sting of rejection pierce through her calm. It's just so hot outside, and I've been advised to avoid overheating. The hostess's smile tightened into something sharp and unsympathetic. Our lobby is reserved for guests with confirmed reservations, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait outside. Serena's legs felt unsteady beneath her. She wanted to argue, to insist that there must have been a mistake, but the reality of the situation loomed too large. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, as if protecting her child from the humiliation she felt. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper, before turning and walking toward the exit. Outside, the heat was overwhelming. The sun beat down mercilessly as Serena found a small bench near the entrance, lowering herself onto it with difficulty. Her back ached, and her feet throbbed in the heat. Pulling out her phone to call Marcus, she realized with dismay that her battery had died. She was stuck, alone, without any way to reach her husband or find out what had gone wrong with the reservation. Minutes turned into an hour. The bench offered little relief from the heat, and Serena shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the sun's relentless rays pressing down on her. Her skin, dark and beautiful, now burned under the scrutiny of passers-by, their glances ranging from curious to indifferent. A steady stream of guests arrived at the restaurant, all greeted warmly by the hostess, who showed no sign of the coldness she had displayed to Serena. Couples in crisp suits and elegant dresses were ushered inside with smiles and polite conversation. Not a single person seemed to notice the pregnant woman sitting on the bench, wilting under the afternoon sun. Serena's thoughts raced as she watched, her emotions oscillating between frustration, hurt, and anger. What made her different from them? Was it the fact that she was pregnant, or was it something else? Something more insidious that lurked beneath the surface of this exclusive establishment. Just as her frustration reached its peak, a sleek sports car pulled up to the valet stand, and out stepped a man Serena recognized immediately. Marcus, looking sharp in his tailored suit, strode toward the entrance, his eyes scanning the area for her. When he spotted her on the bench, his face transformed from confusion to alarm. "Serena," he called out, hurrying toward her. "What are you doing out here?" She looked up at him, the flood of emotions catching in her throat. "They wouldn't let me wait inside," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of what had just happened. They said there was no reservation." Marcus's brow furrowed as he glanced toward the restaurant. He helped Serena to her feet, his arm protectively around her waist, and together they walked toward the entrance. Anger simmered beneath Marcus's calm exterior, but he held it in check, determined to get to the bottom of this injustice. They stepped into the foyer, and the hostess's smile faltered as she recognized Serena and saw Marcus at her side. "Good afternoon," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. "I believe there's been a mistake. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I made a reservation under that name for our anniversary. I'd like to speak to the manager." The hostess's face paled slightly, but she quickly regained her composure, tapping again on her tablet. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Thompson, but there doesn't seem to be a reservation." "That won't be necessary," Marcus interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "I'm the owner of this restaurant, and I think we need to have a serious conversation about how you treat your guests." The hostess froze, her fingers hovering over the tablet as the weight of Marcus's words sank in, and with that revelation, the tide began to turn in ways no one present could have anticipated. The power shift. The hostess's face remained a mask of stunned disbelief as Marcus's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The few patrons in the foyer, who had only half-heartedly been paying attention to the conversation, now turned fully toward the scene. Their eyes widened in shock as they took in the unfolding drama. This was no ordinary customer complaint. The man standing before the hostess wasn't just another guest. He was the owner of Silver Crest. Marcus stood tall beside Serena, his arms still wrapped protectively around her, but there was a tension in his stance that spoke of barely restrained anger. He was a man who had built his success on fairness and respect, not the kind of man who tolerated injustice, least of all when it was directed at his wife. "Let me explain something to you," Marcus began, his voice controlled but unmistakably forceful. "This restaurant, my restaurant, was founded on the principles of excellent service, respect for all guests, and the highest standards of hospitality. What I witnessed here today," he continued, glancing down at Serena, "was not just a failure of customer service. It was a personal affront to me, to my wife, and to the values we stand for." The hostess swallowed visibly, her hand shaking slightly as she held onto her tablet like a lifeline. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could form any words, a tall man in his late 40s appeared from the side corridor. His salt and pepper hair and sharp suit gave him an air of authority, but his face held a mix of confusion and concern. This was Martin, the general manager of Silver Crest, who had been drawn to the commotion in the front. "Is there a problem here?" Martin asked, his gaze shifting between Marcus and the visibly rattled hostess. Serena could feel the tension rolling off Marcus, but he didn't lose his cool. "Yes, there is a problem," Marcus said evenly, his eyes locking with Martin's. "My wife, Serena Thompson, has been waiting outside in the scorching heat for over an hour. Your hostess refused to allow her to wait inside, despite the fact that she is 8 months pregnant, and that I made a reservation for our anniversary." Martin's face went pale as he processed the full weight of the situation. "Mr. Thompson, I had no idea," he stammered, his eyes flicking toward the hostess, who looked like she wanted to disappear. "I can assure you, this was an unfortunate misunderstanding." Marcus shook his head slowly, his voice calm but carrying the weight of finality. "This was no misunderstanding, Martin. This was poor judgment and a failure of basic human decency. Tell me, how is it that a woman who is visibly pregnant, exhausted, and at risk of overheating is denied even the most basic courtesy of sitting inside your restaurant to wait?" Martin glanced nervously at the hostess, whose face had drained of color. I'll handle this personally, Mr. Thompson. Please come inside. We'll get you and Mrs. Thompson seated at our best table right away." But Serena, still reeling from the sting of humiliation, touched Marcus's arm gently. "I don't want to be here anymore," she said softly, her voice breaking with exhaustion. Her swollen feet ached from standing, and the emotional toll of being turned away weighed heavily on her. Marcus turned to her, the anger in his eyes softening at the sight of his wife's fatigue. He nodded. "You're right. Let's get you somewhere comfortable." The commotion had drawn the attention of several high-profile guests dining near the entrance, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding scene. Whispered conversations buzzed in the air, but Marcus ignored them as he gently led Serena toward the exit. Before they could leave, however, a voice called out from behind them. "Mr. Thompson, wait." It was Martin, his face taut with a mixture of desperation and regret. "Please," he said, his tone more urgent now. "Give me a chance to make this right. This was a grave mistake, and I take full responsibility. I want to do whatever I can to correct it." Marcus paused, his hand still resting on the small of Serena's back. He exchanged a glance with her, silently asking if she had the energy for what might come next. Serena hesitated, then nodded faintly, her eyes filled with resolve. She didn't want to be seen as fragile or weak. She had spent her whole life proving her strength, and though she was exhausted, she didn't want this moment to be defined by her vulnerability. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, "but we're going to do this my way." Martin nodded quickly, gesturing for them to follow him toward a private dining room at the back of the restaurant. As they walked, Serena couldn't help but notice the way heads turned and whispers followed in their wake. This wasn't the kind of attention she or Marcus sought, but it was unavoidable now. The illusion of exclusivity at Silver Crest had been shattered, at least for today. When they reached the private dining room, Martin opened the door to reveal an intimate, elegantly decorated space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the restaurant's lush garden. The table was already set with the finest silverware and crystal glasses, clearly prepared for high-profile guests. Serena sank into one of the plush chairs with a sigh of relief as Marcus sat beside her. Martin hovered near the door, wringing his hands nervously. "I'll have the chef prepare anything you like," he said, eager to please. "Complimentary, of course. Please, allow me to rectify the situation." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Martin. "It's not just about the food," he said, his voice firm. "I'm more concerned about the culture that allowed something like this to happen in the first place. My wife wasn't just turned away because of a reservation error. She was treated as though she didn't belong here. And I have to wonder how many other people have experienced the same thing." Martin shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's gaze. I understand your concern, Mr. Thompson. We hold our staff to the highest standards of service, and this was not about standards of service," Marcus interrupted, his voice hardening. "This is about the fact that certain people like my wife, are made to feel unwelcome here. Do you think it's a coincidence that she was turned away while other guests, who look a certain way, are immediately welcomed?" Martin opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. He knew that Marcus was right. For too long, Silver Crest had cultivated an air of exclusivity that went beyond just its high-end prices and clientele. There was an unspoken rule about who was considered acceptable and who wasn't, and Serena, despite her wealth and status, had been perceived as an outsider. "I don't know what to say," Martin finally admitted, his shoulders slumping with the weight of the truth. "But I promise you, we'll make changes. This can't happen again." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Good. Because if it does, there won't be a Silver Crest for much longer." Martin swallowed, clearly understanding the gravity of Marcus's words. A few moments later, the door to the private dining room opened, and the chef himself entered, his face flushed with both exertion and anxiety. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I am deeply sorry for the inconvenience you've experienced. I've prepared a special menu for your anniversary. Anything you desire. Just say the word." Serena managed a small smile, but inside, she felt drained. "Thank you," she said softly, though her appetite had all but vanished. As the chef explained the menu, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly, his face tightening as he read the message. "I need to take this," he said, rising from the table. "I'll be back in a moment." Serena nodded, watching as Marcus stepped out of the room. She could hear his voice, low and serious, as he spoke into the phone, but couldn't make out the words. Alone in the quiet dining room, Serena's thoughts drifted. She stared out the window at the tranquil garden, the beauty of the setting contrasting sharply with the turmoil she felt inside. Today was supposed to be a celebration of their love, a moment to cherish after all the challenges they had faced together. Instead, it had become a reminder of the invisible lines that still divided people, lines drawn by race, class, and assumptions. As Serena gazed out at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze, she thought of her unborn child. What kind of world would they grow up in? A world where their worth would be questioned because of the color of their skin, where they would be made to feel like they didn't belong. The door creaked open, pulling Serena from her thoughts. Marcus re-entered the room, his expression somber. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. Marcus sat down beside her, rubbing a hand over his face. "That was the legal team. They've been investigating complaints we've received about Silver Crest, and it looks like this isn't the first time something like this has happened." Serena's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There have been multiple incidents, Marcus explained, his voice heavy with frustration. Complaints about guests being treated differently based on their appearance, their background. Some of the staff have been turning people away for years, making excuses about reservations or dress codes. But the truth is, they've been deciding who belongs and who doesn't. Serena felt a chill run down her spine. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? Marcus shook his head, his jaw clenched. It didn't go unnoticed. It was ignored, brushed under the rug. Serena reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. What are we going to do? Marcus met her gaze, his eyes burning with determination. We're going to fix it. From the ground up. Starting with a complete overhaul of the staff, the management, and the culture here. This place will either reflect the values we stand for, or it won't exist. Serena nodded, her heart swelling with pride for the man beside her. She had always admired Marcus's integrity, but today, more than ever, she saw the depth of his commitment to justice and fairness. As they sat together in the quiet dining room, the weight of what had happened began to settle. There was so much work to do, so many wrongs to right, but they would face it together. A ripple of change. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, but there was a tension in the air as Marcus and Serena prepared for what would be a turning point in both their lives and the future of Silver Crest. After yesterday's events, Marcus had already made calls late into the night, setting into motion the changes that would need to take place. Today, they were going back to the restaurant. This time, not as guests, but as leaders preparing to clean house. Serena watched Marcus as he dressed for the day, his face set in quiet determination. She could sense the weight of the responsibility he carried, not just as the owner of the restaurant, but as a husband and a father-to-be who was determined to ensure that what had happened to her never happened to anyone else. "Are you sure you want to come with me?" Marcus asked gently, his voice softer now as he turned to face her. "You've been through so much, and you need rest." Serena smiled faintly, but there was steel in her eyes. "I'm coming. This isn't just your fight, Marcus. It's ours. What happened yesterday, it wasn't just an insult to me as your wife. It was an insult to who we are, to the values we stand for." She paused, resting a hand on her belly. "And it's about the kind of world I want our child to be born into." Marcus crossed the room and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, his voice filled with love and admiration. Serena smiled wider this time, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes, you do. Now let's go make some changes." By the time they arrived at Silver Crest, the restaurant was already buzzing with activity. Word of the incident had spread quickly among the staff, and tension rippled through the ranks. Marcus and Serena's arrival had a visible effect. Employees straightened their postures, their expressions a mix of anxiety and curiosity. It wasn't every day the owner of the entire restaurant chain made a personal appearance, especially not under such circumstances. Martin, the general manager, was waiting just inside the entrance, his face pale and drawn. He had been dreading this moment since yesterday, knowing that the future of his career, and the restaurant itself, hung in the balance. As soon as Marcus and Serena stepped through the door, Martin hurried to greet them, his tone respectful but nervous. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson," Martin began, his voice faltering slightly as he tried to maintain his professional demeanor. "I've taken the liberty of gathering the staff in the main dining room for a meeting, as you requested. Everyone is prepared to hear what you have to say." Marcus nodded curtly. "Good. This isn't going to be a typical staff meeting, Martin. It's a reckoning." Martin swallowed hard, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. He gestured toward the dining room. "This way, please." As they entered the spacious dining room, Marcus and Serena were greeted by the sight of the entire staff gathered around the room, from the kitchen crew to the waitstaff to the hostess who had been at the center of yesterday's incident. The air was thick with apprehension, and many of the employees shifted nervously on their feet, unsure of what was to come. Serena scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the hostess. Madeline, she recalled her name, who stood near the back, looking pale and shaken. Serena could see the guilt etched into the young woman's face, but she wasn't here for personal revenge. This was about something bigger. Marcus stepped to the front of the room, his commanding presence drawing the attention of every person in the room. He stood tall, but his expression was calm, calmer than anyone expected. Beside him, Serena stood with quiet dignity, her presence a silent but powerful reminder of why they were all gathered here today. "I want to start by saying that what happened yesterday was unacceptable," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "It was unacceptable not just because my wife, Serena, was treated unfairly, but because it exposed a larger issue that has been festering in this restaurant, and perhaps in others in our chain, for far too long." A murmur of unease rippled through the staff, but no one dared to interrupt. They could feel the gravity of Marcus's words, and each person in the room understood that this was not a normal day at work. "For years, Silver Crest has been known as an exclusive establishment," Marcus continued. "And while there's nothing wrong with exclusivity when it comes to quality and service, it becomes a problem when it's used to discriminate against people, when it's used as a weapon to turn people away simply because they don't fit some narrow definition of who belongs." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each staff member, making sure his words landed. This restaurant was built on the idea that anyone who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with the utmost respect and dignity, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their financial status. Yesterday, that principle was not upheld. Serena stepped forward now, her voice soft but clear as she addressed the room. "What I experienced yesterday was hurtful, not just because I'm Marcus's wife, but because I'm a human being who was made to feel like I didn't belong. And that feeling, that sense of exclusion, is something no one should have to endure." The room was silent, every face attentive, as Serena continued. "I'm not here to demand special treatment because of who I am or who I'm married to. I'm here to demand that every person who walks through these doors is treated with the respect they deserve, no matter where they come from, no matter what they look like." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and Marcus could see the impact they had on the staff. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement. It was clear that many of them had witnessed or even participated in the behavior Serena described, and now they were being forced to confront the consequences. "Things are going to change," Marcus said, his voice breaking the silence. "Starting today, Silver Crest is no longer going to be known for exclusivity. It's going to be known for its inclusivity. We're going to redefine what it means to be a high-end establishment, and that starts with how we treat our guests." He turned to Martin now, his expression hardening slightly. "As general manager, you bear a large portion of the responsibility for what happened. You allowed a culture of discrimination to flourish here, whether it was intentional or not." Martin flinched at the words, but he didn't try to defend himself. He knew that everything Marcus was saying was true. He had turned a blind eye to the way certain guests were treated differently, too focused on maintaining the restaurant's image to see the damage being done. "I take full responsibility, Mr. Thompson," Martin said quietly, his head bowed, "and I'll accept whatever consequences you deem necessary." Marcus studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You've been with this restaurant for a long time, Martin. You've helped build it into what it is today. But I can't overlook what's happened here. You will stay on as general manager, but under strict conditions. There will be mandatory training for all staff, yourself included, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I expect you to lead by example from now on, and any further incidents of discrimination will be met with immediate termination." Martin exhaled, a mix of relief and determination washing over his face. "Understood, sir. I won't let you down again." Marcus nodded, then turned his attention to the rest of the staff. "The same goes for all of you. There will be no more excuses. We're going to change the way this restaurant operates from the inside out, and it starts with how we treat people. I don't care if someone walks in wearing $1,000 suit or a pair of jeans. They will be treated with the same respect, the same warmth, and the same service." The staff nodded, some still processing the weight of the changes to come, while others looked visibly relieved. It was clear that not everyone had been comfortable with the unspoken rules of exclusion that had been practiced in the past, and now they were being given a chance to be part of something better. Serena's eyes shifted back to Madeline, the hostess whose actions had sparked the entire situation. The young woman was standing near the back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if bracing for the worst. Serena could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else: regret. Madeline had made a terrible mistake, and she knew it. "Madeline," Marcus said, addressing the hostess directly now, "you were the face of this mistake yesterday. Do you have anything to say?" Madeline stepped forward hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. I'm so sorry for what I did. I didn't mean to. I didn't realize." She took a shaky breath. "I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I promise it won't happen again." Serena watched her closely, sensing the sincerity in her words. This wasn't just an apology born out of fear of losing her job. This was genuine remorse. Madeline had realized the impact of her actions, and she was clearly devastated by the harm she had caused. "I believe you," Serena said softly, stepping toward her. "And I forgive you." Madeline's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded gratefully, her voice too choked with emotion to respond. "But," Marcus added, his tone firm but not unkind, "there will be consequences. You will also undergo the new training, and you will be closely monitored. I want to give you the chance to learn from this, but if there's ever a repeat of yesterday's behavior, you will be terminated immediately." Madeline nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I won't let you down." The meeting concluded with Marcus outlining the next steps for the restaurant, from the new training protocols to the shift in how Silver Crest would market itself going forward. No longer would it be an exclusive haven for the wealthy and well-dressed. It would become a place where everyone felt welcome. As the staff slowly dispersed, Marcus and Serena lingered in the dining room, watching as the employees murmured amongst themselves, the weight of the day's events still fresh in the air. "Do you think it will work?" Serena asked quietly, turning to Marcus. Marcus exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "It's going to take time," he admitted. "But I believe in change. And I believe that once people see what we're trying to do, they'll get on board." Serena nodded, leaning into his side as they watched the last of the staff leave the room. "I think you're right," she said softly. "We're doing the right thing." Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We are," he agreed, "and it's just the beginning." As they stood there, side by side, watching the sun stream through the tall windows of the dining room, they both knew that this was more than just a turning point for Silver Crest. It was the start of something bigger, an opportunity to make a real difference, not just in their business, but in the world around them. Seeds of transformation. Over the next several weeks, the transformation of Silver Crest began to take root. The restaurant was still a beacon of elegance, with its stunning architecture, exquisite menu, and high-end clientele. But slowly, changes were emerging, not just in the way the restaurant operated, but in the very culture that had once defined it. The first step had been the implementation of Marcus's mandatory staff training, which focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every member of the staff, from the head chef to the dishwashers, was required to attend the sessions. Experts in the field of hospitality and inclusion were brought in to lead workshops that challenged old mindsets and encouraged open discussions about unconscious bias, empathy, and the power of genuine hospitality. The sessions were intense, often emotional. Serena attended many of them herself, sitting quietly in the back as employees shared their thoughts and sometimes their discomfort. It was clear that for some, the changes were a welcome relief. There were servers and kitchen staff who had long been uncomfortable with the way certain patrons were treated differently, but had never felt empowered to speak up. Others, however, found the new direction unsettling. Silvercrest had been a place of exclusivity for so long, and there were those who struggled with the idea that opening the doors to a wider audience might dilute its reputation. One particular session stood out in Serena's mind. The room was filled with employees, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease, as the facilitator, a seasoned hospitality professional named Greg, stood at the front of the room. "Let's talk about what it means to belong," Greg began, pacing slowly as he spoke. "What does belonging look like to you? What does it feel like?" There was a long pause before one of the younger waitstaff, a woman named Jasmine, raised her hand tentatively. "It feels like being seen. Being acknowledged, I guess," she said softly, "like you're not invisible." Greg nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's right. Being seen is a huge part of belonging. It's about being treated as if you matter, as if your presence is valued. And that's what we should be offering every single person who walks through the doors of this restaurant. But here's the question. Have we been doing that?" The silence in the room was palpable, heavy with the weight of reflection. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. Eventually, Martin, the general manager, spoke up. "No," he admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "We haven't." Greg nodded again, his eyes sweeping over the room. "And why not?" Martin hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I think we've been too focused on maintaining an image. We've been so concerned with exclusivity, with catering to a certain type of clientele, that we've lost sight of what hospitality really means." "Exactly," Greg said, his voice gentle but firm. "And that's what we're here to change." Serena watched as the employees absorbed Greg's words, some nodding in agreement while others remained quiet, their expressions unreadable. She could feel the undercurrent of tension in the room, the push and pull between the old way of thinking and the new direction they were being asked to embrace. "Hospitality is about making people feel welcome," Greg continued. "It's not just about serving good food or creating a beautiful atmosphere. It's about the way we make people feel, whether they're in a $1,000 suit or a simple dress, whether they're famous or just a regular person. Our job is to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong." Madeline, the hostess who had been at the center of Serena's experience, sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on Greg. She had been quieter than usual since the incident, clearly shaken by the consequences of her actions, but Serena could see the wheels turning in her mind. Madeline had been one of the first to apologize, and she had thrown herself into the training sessions with a fierce determination to prove that she had learned from her mistakes. During a break in the session, Serena found herself alone with Madeline in the hallway. The younger woman was pacing nervously, her hands twisting together as she seemed lost in thought. "Madeline," Serena called softly, stepping toward her. "How are you feeling about all of this?" Madeline stopped pacing and looked up, her face pale with anxiety. "I'm trying," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I really am. But I keep thinking about what I did and how I made you feel. I didn't mean to. I didn't realize." Serena smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on Madeline's arm. "I know, and I appreciate how hard you've been working to learn from it, but don't let that moment define you. What matters is what you do from here on out. We all make mistakes, but it's how we grow from them that counts." Madeline blinked back tears, nodding gratefully. "I just don't want to let you down, or Mr. Thompson, or anyone." "You won't," Serena assured her. "You're already on the right path. Just keep going." Madeline gave a shaky smile, and Serena could see the weight of self-doubt lifting, if only slightly. It wasn't easy to change, but Madeline was willing, and that was the first step. As the days turned into weeks, the changes at Silvercrest became more visible. The once rigid dress code was relaxed, allowing for a more casual yet still elegant atmosphere. The menu was expanded, offering a range of options that catered to a more diverse audience without sacrificing quality. And most importantly, the staff began to embrace the new culture of inclusivity and genuine hospitality. Marcus worked closely with the team, overseeing every detail of the transformation. He spent hours at the restaurant, meeting with employees, listening to their concerns, and encouraging them to take ownership of the new direction. He wanted them to understand that this wasn't just a top-down mandate, it was a collective effort, and every person had a role to play in creating a welcoming environment. Serena, though still heavily pregnant, made a point of being present as much as she could. She knew that her presence mattered, not just because of what had happened to her, but because she represented the future of Silver Crest. She wanted the staff to see her as part of the solution, not just the reason for the changes. One afternoon, as Serena was seated at one of the quieter tables, reviewing some notes for an upcoming staff meeting, she was approached by a familiar figure. It was Greg, the facilitator who had been leading the training sessions. "Mind if I join you?" Greg asked, his easy smile putting her at ease. "Of course," Serena replied, gesturing to the seat across from her. Greg sat down, folding his hands on the table. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. "I've been really impressed with how you and Marcus have handled all of this. It's not easy to create this kind of change, especially in an industry like this." Serena smiled, though she felt the weight of the compliment. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, that's for sure. But we knew something had to change. We couldn't just let things stay the way they were." Greg nodded thoughtfully. "What you're doing here is important. It's not just about making this restaurant more inclusive. It's about setting an example for the entire industry. There are so many places like Silver Crest that have been operating under the same old rules for too long. You're showing that it's possible to create a high-end experience without shutting people out." Serena felt a surge of pride at his words, but she also knew that there was still so much work to be done. "We're trying," she said, "but it's going to take time. Changing a culture isn't something that happens overnight." "No, it's not," Greg agreed, "but the seeds are already planted. And from what I've seen, they're starting to take root." As they continued their conversation, Serena realized just how much she had learned in the past few weeks. She had always known that hospitality was about more than just serving food. It was about creating a sense of belonging, of making people feel valued. But this experience had deepened her understanding in ways she hadn't expected. It had shown her the power of empathy, of listening, and of taking responsibility for the kind of environment they were creating. As she looked around the restaurant, she saw it in a new light. The elegant decor, the soft lighting, the carefully arranged tables, it was still the Silver Crest she had fallen in love with, but now it felt different, warmer, more welcoming. And that was the kind of place she wanted to be a part of. The real test came on a busy Saturday evening, when the restaurant was fully booked for the first time since the changes had been implemented. The clientele was more diverse than ever before, a mix of longtime patrons and new guests who had heard about the restaurant's transformation. There were families, couples, business dinners, and groups of friends, all seated at tables throughout the elegant dining room. As Serena and Marcus watched from the sidelines, they noticed the subtle but significant shifts in the way the staff interacted with the guests. There was no longer the tense undercurrent of exclusivity, the careful gatekeeping of who belonged. Instead, there was a genuine sense of hospitality, of people being welcomed for who they were, not what they represented. At one point during the evening, Marcus noticed a young couple seated near the window, their clothes simple but neat, their faces lit with excitement as they scanned the menu. They were clearly not the typical Silver Crest patrons, at least, not the kind who would have been welcomed before the changes. But now, they were being treated with the same care and attention as anyone else. Marcus approached their table with a warm smile, introducing himself and asking if they were enjoying their evening. The young man looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Yes, it's amazing," he said. "We've never been anywhere this nice before. We didn't think we could afford it, but we wanted to try it out after hearing about the new menu." Marcus's smile widened. "I'm glad you're here. We hope you'll come back again." As he walked away from the table, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what they had been working toward, a place where everyone felt welcome, where the beauty and elegance of Silver Crest could be enjoyed by anyone who walked through its doors. Later that night, as the last of the guests trickled out and the staff began cleaning up, Marcus and Serena sat together at one of the empty tables, watching the quiet transformation of the restaurant around them. "You know," Serena said softly, resting her hand on her swollen belly, "I think we're finally starting to see the results of all this hard work." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with pride and relief. "We are. And it's only going to get better from here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the staff move through the dining room, their faces relaxed and content. The tension of the past few weeks had begun to melt away, replaced by a new sense of purpose. As they prepared to leave for the night, Marcus turned to Serena, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "This is just the beginning. We've planted the seeds, but now we need to keep nurturing them, not just here, but everywhere." Serena smiled, her heart swelling with love for the man beside her. "We will," she said softly, "together." And as they stepped out into the cool night air, hand in hand, they knew that the journey they had embarked on was far from over, but they also knew that they had the strength, the vision, and the love to see it through. A new horizon. The following months marked a period of sustained growth and profound change, not just for Silver Crest, but for Marcus and Serena as well. The restaurant's transformation was steadily gaining momentum, and word had spread throughout the community and beyond that Silver Crest was no longer the exclusive, unreachable enclave it had once been. It was now a place that stood for something greater than luxury. It represented a vision of inclusion, fairness, and dignity. But with growth came challenges. As the restaurant attracted a more diverse clientele, it also faced scrutiny from certain corners of the industry and the community. Some of the longtime patrons, those who had reveled in Silver Crest's air of exclusivity, began to murmur their dissatisfaction. They missed the old atmosphere, the sense that only a select few were worthy of stepping inside its polished walls. For them, the changes represented a loss, an erosion of what they believed made the restaurant special. One evening, Marcus sat in his office at home, his fingers steepled as he stared at a report on his desk. It was a summary of feedback from patrons over the last month, gathered through online reviews and customer comment cards. While the majority of the feedback was positive, there were a few outliers, voices of dissent that troubled him. "They're saying we're losing our edge," Marcus murmured to himself, his brow furrowing as he scanned the comments. Serena, who had just entered the room, heard his words and approached him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "What's bothering you?" she asked gently. Marcus sighed and gestured to the report. "Some of our old customers, they're not happy with the changes. They're saying that Silver Crest isn't what it used to be. They like the exclusivity, the feeling that they were part of something elite. Now, they think we've watered it down." Serena frowned as she scanned the feedback for herself. "It sounds like they're missing the point," she said, shaking her head. "We're not losing our edge, Marcus. We're gaining something far more important. Integrity. A sense of real community. That's what will make Silver Crest stand out, not the illusion of exclusivity." Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "I know, but it's hard. There's always this pressure to cater to the people who have the most influence, the most money. It feels like we're constantly walking a tightrope between doing what's right and keeping the business profitable." Serena sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. "It's true that we can't ignore the bottom line," she said, "but you've always been about more than just money, Marcus. You've built your success on creating something meaningful, something that lasts. And the truth is, people who understand that will continue to support us. The ones who don't, well, maybe it's time for them to find another restaurant." Marcus looked at her, his eyes softening. "You always know exactly what to say," he murmured. Serena smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'm just reminding you of what you already know. You're not in this alone." It was a conversation they would have to revisit in the months to come, as the push and pull between old and new, between profit and principle, continued to play out. But for now, Marcus felt a renewed sense of clarity. He had made the decision to steer Silver Crest in a new direction, and he wasn't about to back down because of a few voices of dissent. The next morning, Marcus met with his core team at the restaurant, which included Martin, Madeline, the head chef, and several senior members of the staff. The mood in the room was cautiously optimistic. Everyone knew that things were improving, but there was also an awareness that the changes weren't universally popular. "Let's start with the good news," Marcus said, addressing the group. "Revenue is up, and we're seeing more new customers than we have in years. The feedback we're getting from the majority of our guests is overwhelmingly positive. People appreciate the changes, and they're telling their friends and families about it." There were nods of agreement around the table, but Marcus could see the tension in Martin's expression. However, Marcus continued, "There are still a few holdouts, longtime patrons who are unhappy with the new direction. They feel like they're losing something by sharing this space with a more diverse crowd. We've had some complaints about the dress code being too relaxed, and a few people have even suggested that we're lowering the standard by being more inclusive." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the group. Madeline shifted in her seat, her face flushed as she listened. She had been working hard to atone for her past mistakes, and the last thing she wanted was for anyone to feel like Silver Crest was losing its essence. Martin, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "I've heard some of those complaints directly," he admitted. "A couple of our regulars mentioned it to me last week. They liked that Silver Crest felt like a private club, a place where only certain people were allowed in. But I told them that's not what we're about anymore." Marcus nodded, appreciating Martin's candor. "And that's the right response," he said. "We're not turning our backs on quality or luxury. We're elevating what it means to be a top-tier restaurant. Silver Crest will still be one of the finest dining experiences in the city, but it won't be built on exclusion or elitism. The new standard is inclusivity without sacrificing excellence." The head chef, a tall, intense man named Damien, leaned forward in his chair. "I've had some concerns about the menu changes," he admitted. "We've introduced more accessible options, which is great, but there's been pushback from some of our high-end customers. They don't want to see things like burgers or street food-inspired dishes on the menu. They think it's beneath them." Marcus frowned. He had anticipated this reaction, but had hoped it wouldn't be as pronounced. "We're not turning this into a diner, Damien," he said. "But we are broadening our horizons. We can still offer high-end dishes while incorporating more diverse flavors and experiences. This isn't about cheapening the menu. It's about making it more dynamic. We can have a Wagyu beef burger with truffle aioli and a wood-fired lobster tail on the same menu. It's about creating something for everyone without compromising on quality." Damien nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can work with that," he said. "I just want to make sure we don't lose what makes us special." "We won't," Marcus assured him. "In fact, I think we'll gain something even better. This is about evolution, not dilution." As the meeting continued, the staff discussed ways to maintain the balance between honoring the restaurant's history and embracing its future. There were logistical concerns: how to manage the growing number of reservations, how to adjust the marketing to reflect the new direction, and how to handle any further complaints from dissatisfied patrons. But through it all, Marcus and Serena remained steadfast in their commitment to creating a space that was both luxurious and welcoming to all. After the meeting, Marcus and Serena took a quiet walk through the restaurant, which was still empty in the early morning hours. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over the elegant dining room. The polished wood floors gleamed, and the soft clink of dishes being prepared in the kitchen provided a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "You know," Serena said softly, "when we started this journey, I didn't expect it to be this hard. I thought once we made the decision to change, everything would just fall into place." Marcus chuckled, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy," he said, "but look at how far we've come. This place is already so different from what it was just a few months ago. We're making a real impact, and that's what matters." Serena nodded, though she still felt the weight of the challenges they faced. "I just hope the people who really need to see the changes are paying attention," she said. "I hope it's making a difference." Marcus smiled, pulling her closer. "It is," he said firmly, "and it's going to keep making a difference. We're creating a legacy here, not just for ourselves, but for our daughter, for everyone who comes after us. Silver Crest is just the beginning." As they walked, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from the moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's from the corporate office," he said. "I should take this." Serena nodded, watching as Marcus stepped aside to answer the call. She wandered toward the windows, gazing out at the bustling street below. Despite the challenges they had faced, she felt a quiet sense of pride in what they had accomplished. The restaurant was evolving, and so were they. A few minutes later, Marcus rejoined her, his face tight with concern. "That was about the investigation," he said, his voice low. "They've uncovered some things about the way Silver Crest used to operate." Serena turned to him, her heart sinking. "What kind of things?" "More complaints," Marcus explained, running a hand through his hair. "It turns out there's been a pattern of discrimination for years. People being turned away for dress code violations, for lack of reservations, for not fitting the image the staff thought we needed to maintain. And it wasn't just here. It's been happening at a few of our other locations as well." Serena felt a surge of anger and sadness wash over her. "How did we not know?" she whispered. "How did we let this happen?" Marcus shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. We can't just fix things here at Silver Crest. We need to make sure this doesn't happen at any of our restaurants." Serena nodded, her resolve hardening. "We have to do more. We can't just make changes at one place. This is bigger than Silver Crest. It's about who we are as a company, as people." Marcus wrapped his arm around her, his expression determined. "You're right. We'll figure it out. Together." In the days that followed, Marcus launched a full-scale audit of every restaurant in their chain. He brought in external consultants to review practices, policies, and staff training at every level. What had begun as a local issue at Silver Crest was now a company-wide effort to address systemic problems and ensure that every establishment reflected the values they wanted to uphold. The process was grueling. There were hard conversations, difficult decisions, and moments of doubt. Some staff members resisted the changes, clinging to the old ways of doing things. Others embraced the opportunity to grow and learn, grateful for the chance to be part of something better. Marcus and Serena found themselves navigating a complex web of emotions and logistics, but they refused to back down. Through it all, Serena remained a constant source of strength for Marcus. Her presence at meetings, her quiet words of encouragement, and her unwavering belief in what they were doing kept him grounded. Together, they were not only transforming a restaurant, they were transforming an entire company. And as the changes took root, they began to see the impact ripple out beyond Silver Crest. Other restaurants in their chain started implementing similar policies, focusing on inclusivity and genuine hospitality. Patrons who had once felt excluded now found themselves welcomed with open arms. The restaurant industry, long known for its exclusivity and elitism, was beginning to shift, and Marcus and Serena were at the forefront of that movement. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Marcus and Serena returned home, exhausted but satisfied. As they sat together on the couch, Serena resting her head on Marcus's shoulder, they reflected on the journey they had taken. "We've come a long way," Serena said softly, her voice filled with both pride and awe. Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with love as he looked down at her. "And we still have a long way to go," he said. But I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else. Serena smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. Neither would I. As they sat together in the quiet of their home, the weight of the challenges ahead still looming, they knew that they were ready to face whatever came next. They had built something extraordinary, something that would last far beyond them. Silver Crest was just the beginning, a legacy in motion. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the crisp air signaled the change of seasons, Silver Crest stood at the crossroads of its own transformation, now a symbol of resilience and reform. What had started as a reaction to a single moment of injustice had blossomed into a movement of change within Marcus and Serena's entire restaurant empire. They had tackled systemic issues head-on, and though the journey was far from over, the foundation they laid was unshakable. But with the transformation of the restaurant chain came personal changes as well. Serena's pregnancy had reached its final weeks, and the anticipation of their child's arrival added a new layer of urgency and emotion to their daily lives. Even with all the meetings, strategy sessions, and constant oversight of the ongoing audits across their restaurants, Marcus and Serena had carved out time to prepare for the biggest change of all, becoming parents. One chilly morning, Serena sat in the nursery, carefully folding tiny clothes into drawers, her belly prominent beneath her soft robe. The room was serene, painted in soothing shades of cream and pastel blue, with whimsical artwork of trees and animals adorning the walls. As she folded, her thoughts wandered, reflecting on the whirlwind that had been the past few months. The nursery had become a place of quiet reflection for her, a sanctuary in the midst of the chaos. She often found herself coming here when the weight of the world felt too heavy, and today was no different. Her mind replayed the events that had led them here, from the humiliating experience of being turned away at Silver Crest to the monumental changes they had implemented across their entire restaurant group. There had been moments of triumph, but there had also been moments of fear and doubt. Serena had always known she was strong, but these past months had tested her strength in ways she hadn't expected. She had been at the center of a movement that was both personal and professional, and she had carried the weight of that responsibility with grace. Now, as she stood on the precipice of motherhood, she wondered how much more she would need to grow to meet the new challenges ahead. Marcus entered the room quietly, watching Serena from the doorway for a moment before speaking. "You've been in here a lot lately," he said, his voice soft with concern. Serena looked up and smiled. "It's peaceful in here," she said, turning to him as he approached. "I guess I'm trying to prepare myself for all the changes coming." Marcus slipped his arms around her, resting his hands on her belly. "I've been thinking about that a lot too," he admitted. "Everything's changing so fast. It feels like just yesterday we were dealing with that awful day at Silver Crest, and now we're about to become parents. It's a lot to take in." Serena nodded, leaning into him. "Do you think we're ready?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with vulnerability. Marcus paused, considering the question. "I think we've been ready for this. Maybe not every little detail, but the important parts. We know who we are. We know what we stand for. That's what's going to carry us through. Besides," he added with a small smile, "we've already faced some of the hardest challenges of our lives together. We've proven we can handle anything." Serena smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "You're right," she said. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." That evening, Marcus received a call from their corporate office. The full results of the company-wide audit were in, and the findings were both sobering and encouraging. While several of their restaurants had been operating under problematic policies, the swift changes they'd implemented at Silver Crest had begun to ripple outward, influencing the rest of the chain in positive ways. "We've uncovered a lot of issues," Marcus explained to Serena after the call. "But the good news is that we've already started to fix them. The feedback from customers has been overwhelmingly positive since the changes began. People are noticing what we're doing, and they appreciate it. Our numbers are up across the board." Serena listened carefully, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "That's great to hear," she said. But what about the staff? Are they on board? Most of them are, Marcus said. There have been a few holdouts, people who didn't like the new direction. We've had to let a few go, but overall, the staff has embraced the changes. I think they're starting to see that this isn't just a temporary fix. It's the new normal. Serena nodded thoughtfully. It's not easy to change people's mindsets, but it sounds like we're making real progress. We are, Marcus agreed, but we can't stop now. There's still so much work to do, and I want to make sure that the culture we're building here lasts, long after we're gone. Serena smiled, sensing the depth of Marcus's commitment. It will, she said confidently. We're building something that's going to last for generations. A few days later, as Marcus and Serena were finishing up the final details of a particularly busy day, Serena suddenly felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She froze, her hand instinctively flying to her belly as another contraction rippled through her. "Marcus," she gasped, her face tight with discomfort. "I think it's time." Marcus, who had been checking his email, shot up from his chair, wide-eyed. "Now?" he asked, his voice tinged with both excitement and panic. Serena nodded, her breathing shallow as she tried to remain calm. "Yes, now. We need to go to the hospital." In an instant, Marcus was in action, grabbing the hospital bag they had packed weeks earlier and helping Serena to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like a blur, the city lights flashing by as Marcus's heart raced with anticipation. He had been preparing for this moment for months, but now that it was actually happening, the reality of it hit him with full force. His daughter was about to be born. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity of labor, the cries of a newborn filled the room. Marcus and Serena looked at each other, their eyes filled with tears of joy and exhaustion, as the nurse placed their tiny daughter in Serena's arms. "She's perfect," Serena whispered, her voice thick with emotion, as she gazed down at the baby's scrunched-up face, her little fists clenched tightly. Marcus, standing beside her, could barely speak. He reached out, gently stroking his daughter's cheek, overwhelmed by the flood of love he felt in that moment. "Hope," he whispered. "That's her name. Hope." Serena looked up at him, smiling through her tears. "It's perfect," she agreed. "She's our hope, for the future, for everything." The days that followed were a whirlwind of late-night feedings, diaper changes, and moments of quiet awe as Marcus and Serena settled into their new roles as parents. The world outside continued to spin, but for those first precious weeks, nothing else mattered except their little family. Yet, even in the midst of sleepless nights and the overwhelming demands of parenthood, Marcus and Serena never lost sight of the larger mission they had begun. They knew that what they were building, both at Silver Crest and in their personal lives, was something that would extend far beyond their own immediate experience. They were creating a legacy, one that would shape the world their daughter would grow up in. One afternoon, about a month after Hope's birth, Marcus and Serena returned to Silver Crest for the first time as a family. The restaurant had become a symbol of their journey, a place that had once caused them pain, but had now been transformed into a beacon of change. As they walked through the doors with Hope in Serena's arms, they were greeted by the warm smiles of the staff, many of whom had witnessed the transformation firsthand. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Madeline exclaimed, hurrying over to greet them. Her face lit up with excitement as she caught sight of the baby. "And this must be little Hope. She's beautiful." Serena smiled, her heart swelling with pride as she cradled her daughter. "Thank you, Madeline," she said softly. "It's good to be back." As they made their way to a private table, Marcus couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere felt. The dining room was filled with a diverse group of patrons, families, couples, and groups of friends from all walks of life. The old air of exclusivity was gone, replaced by a genuine sense of warmth and welcome. It was exactly what he and Serena had envisioned, and seeing it come to life filled him with a deep sense of fulfillment. Over the course of the evening, Several staff members stopped by to offer their congratulations, and Marcus took a moment to reflect on the journey they had taken. It hadn't been easy, but the challenges had been worth it. They had built something truly special, something that would stand the test of time. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, Marcus and Serena paused at the entrance, taking one last look at the restaurant they had worked so hard to transform. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," Marcus said quietly, slipping his arm around Serena's waist. "This place is so different from what it was when we started." Serena smiled, leaning into him. "It's everything we hoped for," she said, "and it's only going to get better." As they stepped out into the cool night air, Marcus looked down at his daughter, who was sleeping peacefully in Serena's arms. He felt a profound sense of purpose, a knowledge that what they had started would continue long after they were gone. Hope would grow up in a world that was a little kinder, a little fairer, because of the choices they had made. And that was the true legacy they were leaving behind. Over the next several years, Marcus and Serena continued to oversee the growth and evolution of their restaurant chain, but their focus shifted as well. They began to use their platform to advocate for broader changes within the hospitality industry, pushing for greater diversity and inclusivity at all levels. Their efforts garnered national attention, and soon other restaurateurs were following their lead, inspired by the success of Silvercrest's transformation. But for Marcus and Serena, the real victory wasn't in the accolades or the financial success. It was in the knowledge that they had created something that would endure, a legacy of compassion, fairness, and hope. They had built a business that reflected their values, and they had done it together. One evening, several years later, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Hope, now a bright, curious toddler, played at their feet. Serena leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, her heart full as she watched their daughter laugh and chase the fireflies that danced in the fading light. "You know," Serena said softly, her voice filled with contentment, "we've built something amazing. Not just with Silvercrest, but with everything. Our family, our life. It's all more than I ever could have dreamed." Marcus smiled, his hand resting on hers. "We've done it together," he said. "And we'll keep doing it. For hope, for the future." As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together in the quiet of the evening, knowing that the legacy they had created would live on in the world, and in the hearts of those who had been touched by their journey. And that, more than anything, was the greatest success they could have ever hoped for.